On the workbench here I have 4 rifles, all with one thing in common. They all have repaired stocks, with whole replacement sections being grafted onto an existing stock in order to restore a cut-down or sporterized rifle back to the original configuration. Ideally, the repair, where the old wood meets the new, would be hidden, such as in the case of this US Model 1903 A3 Springfield rifle from World War II. I bought this rifle from a local gun store. It had been cut down to a sporting configuration, but the metal parts were untouched. Only the stock and the handguard were modified. This is what it looked like when I got it. Excuse the poor quality, as this picture was taken 13 years ago on a flip phone. To fix it, I bought a drill rifle stock that had a cracked wrist. I then spliced the front end of that stock onto the rear of the sporterized stock. Since the stock had been modified only ahead of the middle band, I was able to hide the joint under the barrel band, very similar to a duffel cut repair. To join the two pieces, I cut a slot, or a mortise, in the front section, and then cut the rear section into a tenon. This provides a long grain to long grain joint, which is much stronger than simply cutting the two pieces straight down and then gluing together the end grain. The more surface area in the joint, the stronger it will be. And that's evident in just how long this has lasted. Like I said, I did this 13 years ago. The wood finish between the two sections was close to begin with, but over time they've aged together, and I bet most people would think that this was one piece. To finish off the repair, the handguard was a new old stock replacement. But what if the joint isn't in an area where it could be easily hidden? This rifle is a Kar 88, a German cavalry carbine made in 1890. I came across it again, much like the 1903, as a sporter cut down with the metal intact and just the original stock cut back. But unlike the 1903, the stock had been cut down further, and it had been tapered and shaped to come to a narrower point. It had seemed like the tapering started just ahead of the crossbolt, so that's where the repair would need to start. Unlike the 1903, there's no barrel band in that area to hide the repair, so it would have to be visible. Wherever there's two pieces of wood where the end grain butts up against one another, it will never disappear. Even if I were to take a board and cut it in half, and then put those two pieces back together again, there would still be a vertical line visible. Other than the repair not being hidden, this was done in pretty much the same way as the 1903, with a mortise and tenon joint, the tenon being as long as the sporterized stock would allow. One minor difference is that while I used wood glue for the long grain connection, which is what provides the strength of the joint, I used epoxy for the end grain connection, primarily as a filler so that the joint is smooth to the touch. The main difference between this and the 1903 is that the front section was made by hand, not taken from a replacement stock. Sometimes, or really most times, replacement stock sections aren't available and you need to improvise, and that's why the front and the back sections don't match one another. There's very new wood in the front and very old wood in the back, with that old wood being obviously refinished multiple times. Less obvious is the feel of it, which is very smooth due to over-sanding. It had been refinished when the rifle was sporterized, but the finishing went above and beyond most, with the wood being polished and just not feeling right for a military rifle. And that's why a project that I have on the back burner is to make a complete replacement one-piece stock for this rifle. That covers the two rifles with front end stock repairs. These other two are repaired at the wrist area, albeit in different ways. Repairing in this area is trickier and more involved since strength is a greater concern. Recoil is transmitted from the action down the wrist into the buttstock and then into the shooter, so any repairs between the action and the shooter need to be strong enough to last any length of time. The rifle on top, a Gewehr 88, the long rifle version of the Kar 88 earlier, was bought from Century Arms as a barreled action, To my surprise, it showed up as an almost complete rifle, though the buttstock had been broken off at the wrist, somewhat along the grain. What started as a parts buy turned into a project rifle. I started by cutting a flat surface, leaving as much of the original material as possible. Then a buttstock blank made from walnut was glued on, with wood glue and pressure being applied not from clamps, but by exercise bands. I then shaped it to match a friend's stock. To help manage recoil, I drilled a hole on the underside and epoxied in a piece of steel that spans both old and new sections. I then capped it off with a walnut plug. The steel reinforcement probably isn't necessary since the surface area of this glue joint is quite large, and most of the strength comes from that. For finishing, I mixed some stains and dyes until I ended up with something close, though the original section gets lighter at the joint due to the blending that it needed to smoothly transition into the new section. I then created artificial wear by hitting the stock with various objects, hammers, keys, etc., so it's not as pristine looking. Just like before, with nothing to cover up the repair joint, it will always be noticeable to some degree. Even if I were to perfectly match the colors, there's no passing this off as an original one-piece stock. The bottom rifle, a Danish Krag Jorgensen, was an auction find that was won with newly inspired confidence after repairing the Gewehr 88. It had its buttstock cut off, or maybe hacked off with an axe, since it had been cut across the grain. The way in which it had been cut, just behind the rear action screw, didn't leave much material for an angled repair like I did on the Gewehr 88. Gluing the end grain of the old stock to the end grain of a new buttstock just wouldn't work. Like the two front end repairs earlier, I used a mortise and tenon joint to fix this. The sides of the original stock were shaved down to create the tenon. This left the inletting mostly untouched. The wrist of the buttstock was shaped as the mortise. Again, I glued with wood glue for strength and epoxy for filler at the ends. Since the rear tang of the Krag action bears most of the recoil, I bedded it in epoxy as well. This serves to transfer the recoil from the action back into the buttstock without first being transmitted through the front end. The length of this mortise and tenon joint is shorter than with the other repairs, so there's less surface area for the glue bond, making this joint perhaps not as strong. But with the recoil somewhat skipping the front end, and thus the joint, this has held up well over time. I've shot this rifle a bunch with no signs of the repair being inadequate. Really, all of these repairs have held up over the years. Hopefully this video has given you some idea of how to repair the stocks of sporterized rifles to bring them back to their original military configuration. These techniques are especially useful on rifles where replacement stocks are hard to find, expensive, or downright impossible to replace. Even if you have to make a replacement section, as with the case of 3 of the rifles here, it's easier than making a whole replacement stock. Thanks for watching.